Hi everybody and welcome to the 9th episode in this tutorial series. Today we're going to take a look at for loops in Python. Before I do a lot of explaining, I'm going to go ahead and paste in an easy example, and we're going to try and grasp the concept of this for loop together using the example that I've just put in. So every for loop always starts with the keyword for, and x is our variable, and it is going to be the variable which runs through the range and executes the code that comes after the colon. And the code that comes after the colon is just a simple print function which prints our value of x. So there's one thing that you don't really see in this for loop, which Python does for you and is in the nature of the for loop. What happens is that x starts with a value of 0 and then executes the code, but then what you don't see is that it increments the value of x by 1. So it goes in with a value of 0, does the code, increments, puts the value back in the for loop, and then it goes through this process the number of times until the final value in the range is reached. But that's the cool thing about these for loops, that you do not need to write this increment because Python does it for you. Alright, so let's go ahead and run the program and see what the output is. And the output is going to be given down here in our console, and it says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now some of you guys might be wondering, alright, why is the 6 not being printed if the range is 0 to 6? The way to understand it is that Python executes the code that comes after the colon a total number of 6 times. That is exactly what it has done. It has executed this code a total number of 6 times. Because if you count through these values, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 5 and the 0, a total number of 6 times. So it has in fact gone ahead and done exactly what we'd expect it to do. In these for loops, there are two things that you need to pay attention to. The first thing is that you do not necessarily need to have the variable x. You can also call the variable z, for example. It will also execute, right? I've just run the program again, and you'll see it has done and given us the same output as before. You don't even need to use z. You can use pretty much any value you want for these. So that's the first thing to pay attention to. The second thing is the indentation. Just like with if and else statements, you always want to make sure that you have the right level of indentation. So this is a pretty easy example. We are going to now look at a more complex example, which doesn't iterate over a range, but iterates over a list of elements. So you remember how we made lists. We had these square brackets, and then we had our elements. I'm going to give it a couple of elements, just like blue, for example, a couple of colors, blue, green, violet, and yellow, and yellow. And you'll see that if I go ahead and run this program now, it is going to output all the elements in the list. So now the only thing that's changed is that instead of having a range, we have a list of elements. And these elements are string values, which are blue, green, violet, and yellow. So this is also possible. You don't necessarily need to iterate over an index, just like we did before. We can also iterate over the elements in a list. And what's even more interesting, you don't even need to have a list. You can also have a string. which is pretty interesting. So let's put in my first name, Maximilian, and we are going to iterate over all the characters in my first name. Let me go ahead and run this, and you'll see that it has gone ahead and printed out individually all the single letters in my first name. So now you see that the for loops, they iterate not only over a range, they iterate also over lists or even strings. So what's interesting is that we can go ahead and nest other statements within our for loop. In our last tutorial, which I'll link down in the at the bottom of the description, we learned about nested statements. And we can go ahead and do a nested statement and implement a nested statement right into this for loop. So let's say that we want to print that it has finished printing the name Maximilian after it has once it has reached the letter N. So we're going to say that if the value of Z is equal to N, we're going to go ahead and say that it should print that it has finished printing the name. So it's going to say finished printing all letters, for example. So now what will happen is that this for loop is going to iterate through all the single letters in this word, and it's going to print them all. And once the variable Z reaches the final element of the string, which is my name, it will go ahead and print that it has printed all the letters. Let's go ahead and run. And you already see at the bottom that after, well, let me make this bigger for a moment, it has gone ahead and printed my entire name just like it did before, but it has also printed the statement finished printing all letters. So with this example, you see that you can indeed nest statements within for loops as well. Alright, so before we end this tutorial, there are two more keywords that I want to introduce today because they are very frequently used in conjunction with for loops. The first keyword I want to introduce is the keyword break. Now what that allows us to do is that it allows us to break the loop at a given moment that we decide. So let's say that we only want to print out Max and not the entire Maximilian. You'll see that if we go ahead and just execute the code without the break function, it's going to go ahead and give us the entire name. But we only want to print out the MAX. So one way to implement it is by pasting back in our if statement and saying that if Z reaches X, it should break. Let me go into the syntax in a little more detail. So now what's happening is that the Z will start off from M again, and it will then move to the right until it reaches the X. It will still go ahead and print the X, and the next thing it will do is it will execute this if statement and break the loop. So we'll go ahead and run that, and you'll see that the console output is only MAX. And that's exactly what the break statement has done for us. So now that we know what break does, let us have a brief look at the last keyword that I wanted to introduce, which is continue. Now, continue is quite a helpful keyword because it allows us to make exceptions in our for loop. Let's say, for example, that we wanted to print this string of characters, but we want to print it without the i's. So the way that we could implement that is by saying that if Z, our variable in the loop, is equal to I, we want to continue the for loop without printing. So first we need to check whether z is equal to I, and if it is, it will continue the for loop, but if it does not apply and z is anything other than I, it will continue with the next line of code, which is print. So in essence, what the continue does is that it sends us back to the for loop if the condition that we state over here is true. Let's go run that, and you'll see that it has gone ahead and done exactly what we wanted it to do, which is print the string of characters without the i's. Yeah, and you'll see that if I take the print and place it back above the if statement, we'll get the wrong result because it prints out the value of z before it checks what the value is. So if we want to make sure that the i's are all away in our Maximilian, but I'll show you again. Right now they're in, right? And now I'll put the print below the if statement and run it again. And you'll see that it has printed the characters without the i's. Now, we're going to leave it there for today. If this video helped you out, make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see each other in the next one. Bye.